Hello, WrestleTalk, friends and fans. Unfortunately, we are back with another one of these things. It's been a while. It's been a while since we've had to do one of these, but sure enough, spring cleaning time has once again come for WWE stars, and we have another stream here to talk about the WWE releases that have been going on today. It's NXT names, and as you can tell by the initial title, the initial thumbnail, I mean, names are still rolling in, but there have been some surprising names to say the least. SP3, do you have the current list in front of you?
Yes, I do. A couple of these names are a little new for me because they're really just performance center individuals. So I
Right.
might butcher the pronunciation a little bit, but the names that are most prevalent to everybody, of course, Dakota Kai. You got Malcolm Bivens, Harland, who is Parker Bordeaux, Persia Parada, Sanjana George, Draco Anthony, Mila Malani, Raylan Devine, and Paige Prinzin Valley. Prinzin Valley.
Right. So, of course, there's a lot of performance center talent. A lot of people who hadn't made the main, almost call it the main roster, the NXT main roster. They haven't been on TV. But at the same time, we've got Dakota Kai, who at this point is one of the longest tenured NXT stars. She's been there for a hot minute. You've got Malcolm Bivens, one of the best talkers in WWE. You've got Harland, who people could not stop going off about being the next Brock Lesnar, and worlds of potential for this guy,
Including Paul Heyman himself.
right? But go down the list, you've got Dexter Lumis, who they've always seemed very, keen on, as well as Persia Parada, who's involved in Dexter Lumis's story in NXT, but they've also been very high on Persia Parada. So those are some very big key names, and we're going to be checking out Twitter, and of course, WrestleTalk.com is going to have everything up to the minute. We're going to be updating the list that's on the WrestleTalk.com main page, so make sure that you check that out in case these names just keep coming in. But SP3, what is your biggest surprise so far from this initial list?
It's got to be Malcolm Bivens because I've been a very big advocate for Malcolm Bivens since I saw him at Stokely Hathaway in Ring of Honor when I was a big Ring of Honor fan going to a bunch of the East Coast shows, whether it be in Philly and New York. And I saw his talent. He's a guy that used to manage Moose, helped him along early in his career before he got to Impact Wrestling. And then when he got with WWE, he seemed to kept getting these obstacles and seemed like miscast a lot of times, whether he was with Indus Share at the beginning, then the original Diamond Mind idea. I believe Sean Rossap put out the tweet of the original members that was supposed to be in Diamond Mind, which was Roderick Strong, Marina Shafir, Tyler Rust, Hideki Suzuki, and pretty much everyone that he named, the only person that's left is Roderick Strong. So it just seems like every single time they gave him a new idea, a new act to work with, there was an obstacle that he had to overcome. But with Diamond Mine, he was able to get himself over, able to get these new stars in the Creed brothers over and Ivy Nile, and they had something going there. And they have an interesting storyline. Me and Sad review the show every Wednesday, and this was one of the interesting things that me and Sad were talking about, where I was like, Diamond Mine's real leader is Malcolm Bivens. Sat was saying the real leader is Roderick Strong, but I wanted it to be Malcolm Bivens because he is one of the best talkers in that whole company, regardless of being in NXT. If you look at the main roster, there's a bunch of people, and I said number one, Ronda Rousey needs a mouthpiece, and if anybody could be a great mouthpiece for her, it would have been Malcolm Bivens, in my opinion. So this is why it's a big shocker to me. And then even in his response, the little video that he put up on his Twitter immediately after the news broke, where he says that the one thing he's gonna miss is Xyla Lee. You see the charisma just oozing off of this man. Even in response to his release, he could still make people laugh. This man is way too talented, and it just is mind-boggling that this company couldn't find something for him.
I mean, yeah, you look at his tenure in WWE, and this is a guy who, again, is one of the standout talkers of the independent scene, coming off 2018, 2019, coming out as the real Chucky T and then the real Stokely Hathaway, or it was, you know how it is. Yeah, Stokely Hathaway
Yes.
is a fantastic entertainer, and he and Chuck Taylor, should their paths ever cross again, they've got a lot of really funny stuff going on. But him joining WWE was always so weird because he shows up and he's got Indus Sher, and then they get taken off of TV very quickly. They may have one match. And he really doesn't get seen very often outside of a few appearances with Tyler Rust. And that was just such a wishy-washy kind of pairing where they never did anything with Tyler Rust. It was always that, well, Malcolm Bivens is going to try and pull it out of him. And then he's part of the initial group for Diamond Mine, but of course we all saw what happened there. So there's a lot of stop-start that goes on with this guy. And again, I know they've never been a company since post 1990 or whatever year you want to do the cutoff. They do not like having managers. And I really do not understand it. With the exception of Paul Heyman, who you would think would have taught them something about how great managers can be over the last 10 years. He's been carrying Brock Lesnar promo segments for the last decade. They can't find a use for someone like Malcolm Bivens in WWE with so many people that can't cut a promo, or that's the only thing holding them back. They can't find a use for Malcolm Bivens, and I don't understand that. I will never understand that. And to me, I don't think, because there's going to be a lot of talk again of, budget cuts, because again, it's that time of year, always around this time, it seems now we're getting another one of these. And I do not advocate for budget cuts in the name of budget cuts, especially with some of the names that we see here. Now, there are some exclusions and everything. Everybody's kind of on a case-by-case basis. Malcolm Bivens, of course, has reported earlier today that he was offered a new contract earlier in the year and was told that he said that he didn't want to sign it. So fair play. Again, perhaps if they had used him better, maybe he would have a different tune. But it's not like, oh, they fired all these people before the holidays like it was in November, right? I don't think there were a ton of people in that group that were like, yeah, I'm really hoping for my release this November 28th, this end of the year, right before Christmas. This could be different. That being said, I don't agree with budget cuts in the name of budget cuts when you're making money at the rate that WWE is. So again, everything is on a case-by-case basis with these ones. But again, you've got names on this list like Harland. Now, you look at someone like Harland and Parker Boudreaux, for those who know him under that name, and got really caught up in the hype around this man very recently, in fact. I've asked this question before, but what are they looking for?
I don't know, because this is a guy that had WWE superstar written all over him, and this was another guy. This is another guy that they kind of miscast by, this is a guy that everybody said he looks like Brock Lesnar. He could probably move like Brock Lesnar. He comes from an athletic background, a collegiate star, and they placed him with Joe Gacy, and he was basically Nails 2.0. It was just very weird how they placed him. And, when you look at his social media presence as well, he's friends with like Kevin Durant and big stars in the NBA and in the hip hop world. Westside Gunn is a friend of his as well. This is a guy that can really be like a mainstream star on the NXT level as you get him the reps that he needs to get to really be a polished performer. You could have used him as like you could have made him in the Brock Lesnar mode in NXT, because we really haven't seen that since the days of the independent stars coming in and kind of going on that type of like winning streak. You could have done that type of model with Parker Boudreaux in NXT, and it would have worked, in my opinion, because he has that type of social media presence. But they placed him with Joe Gacy in a time where Joe Gacy's character was very wishy-washy with the buzzwords and everything, and then he was along with him in the transition to what Joe Gacy is now. If you watch me on Wednesday, I reenact his promos, and it's similar in the mode to like Bray Wyatt and the cult leader. That's not who Harland or Parker should have been in the first place. When you got a guy that's that athletic, comes from that athletic background, has a social media presence, you should come up with better ways to use that.
I agree. And for those who are just joining us again, this is the stream dedicated to talking about WWE's latest set of NXT releases, the current list, and again, hopefully the final list, but that's never guaranteed. The list currently is Dakota Kai, Malcolm Bivens, Blair Baldwin, who's a referee, Harland, Persia Parada, Sanjana George, also known as Vish Kanya, Draco Anthony, Raylene Devine, Mila Milani, and Dexter Lumis. So, again,
And
some
literally,
surprising names.
my list didn't even have Dexter Lumis because I figured like Dexter Lumis was just announced maybe a minute or
Right.
two before we went live here. So this is still ongoing, and I hate days like this when I know Sean is doing his job, but when you see that tweet, more NXT releases coming, you don't know when it's going to end, and it's very unfortunate for a lot of people.
Yes, and again, because I've just seen something that I'm verifying, but let's, as always, not just put names in the chat because that's not cool. These are people's lives. These are people's livelihoods. Let's not do that. So we're making sure that anything is being verified before we say it on stream and everything. So to the person saying a name that I cannot currently find, don't do that. So the next one, perhaps not necessarily one of the more, well, you know what? Screw that. I want to still talk about Harland because this is baffling to me. This is absolutely baffling to me. I understand that they have a certain mold that they're trying to fit everybody into at the moment, right? They've said, publicly or otherwise, it's public knowledge at least, that they don't want indie stars right now. Technical wrestling is not it's not the in season for them in WWE right now. And regardless of how you feel about the style of wrestling or whatnot, sure, if that is your model, run that model as best you can and try and make a good show. That's fine. At the same time, however, how do you then go and sign someone like Harland and turn around and release them so quickly afterwards? Now, granted, I'm not in the performance center. Maybe he just never picked it up. Maybe there was a lot of talk about it, and they just said, you know what, we have to cut our losses. He's not cut out for this. That's totally possible. So I don't want to write them off completely. But at the same time, they didn't exactly give this guy the tools to succeed on NXT. And he's exactly what they are looking for in just, if you're going to mold a man out of clay to be a WWE superstar, I present you with this man. And yet still, he is among the names that are being released. That to me is very surprising because it's one thing if it's a Dakota Kai or a Malcolm Bivens who are not WWE products, the prototypical WWE stars, because they're very good talkers, very good wrestlers for a multitude of reasons. For some reason, being good at things means you're probably not suited for WWE. Regardless, Harland seems like a natural fit for them, and it still didn't work out. And I don't know if we're going to find out a reason why it didn't work out, but that one to me stands out.
Yeah, 100%. Because what we heard when they did this whole restructuring of what they wanted at the Performance Center ahead of NXT 2.0, they said they want collegiate athletes who they can mold. They don't want people from the independent scene, like the people we just mentioned, like Malcolm Bivens, who was Stokely Hathaway and successful over there. Dakota Kai had a successful run on the UK scene and Progress and stuff. So they don't really fit that type of mode. And, it was always it felt like on borrowed time for a lot of these performers that were on NXT at the time when they were making this restructuring. But Harland was one of the guys that they got around that time. So he fit the mold perfectly. This is a guy that you could, like you said, shape from the little bit of clay, and you can make him into whatever you want. And like I said, they kind of miscast him from the very beginning when he came on television. So it's very strange. It is very baffling, and to be honest, how this didn't work out for them. And it really doesn't feel like they gave him a chance to develop. This is what NXT is all about. It's a developmental, and you didn't really allow this guy to develop before he got released. We don't know if it's maybe something that he asked for. He asked for his release because he's been off television for maybe three weeks or so. He was a part of the angle to kidnap Rick Steiner about 3 weeks ago, where the Joe Gacy and Braun Breaker rivalry kicked off, and then inconspicuously the next week he was gone, and he hasn't been back on television since. So I really want to know the story behind this release, because it was very strange when he got removed from the whole Joe Gacy act, and now we understand why this has happened. But I want to know the why to the why of why he was gone from television ahead of his release.
Right. Well, there's been a number of reports too, because news is coming in and reactions are coming in from all sides. We had a tweet from Dave Meltzer earlier who said that releases in NXT were expected as of 2 weeks ago. So that could very well mean that some of these were taken into account when writing the last few weeks of NXT, which could mean that Harland was not on TV for that reason. But at the same time, we got Duke Hudson and Indy Hartwell and Persia Pirotta and Dexter Lumis all in the same segment very recently. They just started a tag team. So at the same time, maybe that kept Harland off TV, but it clearly wasn't enough to keep them from starting a whole angle involving two of the people that have now been released. Let's talk about Persia Pirotta and Dexter Lumis. Dexter Lumis, I will make no bones about it. I have not been the biggest fan of his work in NXT. I think that is neither here nor there. I'm just putting that aside. Doesn't matter. As far as I think he's a talented performer, of course. I'd never been a fan of the Dexter Lumis character, but Sam Shaw is a talented guy. And now he's going to be able to prove that again. He might be able to go back to Impact or whatever. It doesn't matter where any of these people go. I'm sure they will all be able to find work because they're all talented people. Why now? He seemed to me to be a guy who Vince McMahon would be tickled with. You know, he seemed like the funny guy that would get pulled out from under the ring, and Vince McMahon would crack up watching him. But at the same time, and maybe I'm just theorizing here, I don't know that he quite fits like the chase the 24/7 title gang, right? I don't necessarily think that, like, it's really hard to write around Dexter Lumis compared to any of the other people that they've got on the WWE roster, unless you completely change who he is, which they are no stranger to doing. So I think that might just be something where it's harder to write for this guy. So rather than do that, we cut him loose. Maybe, I don't know. That might be why we never saw him get called up to the main roster. That might, I don't know. Again, this is all speculation on my part. Don't report anything that I say, not that anyone should ever do that. But SP3, what do you make of both Persia Pirotta and Dexter Lumis going, especially as we just launched a new angle?
The Persia one is more confusing because she got a really big push in the beginning of working on NXT. You know, you had the whole angle where Dexter was off and Indy was distracted with that, and Persia's beating women 2-on-1 in 2-on-1 handicap matches on her own. And then you did the whole angle at, you know, Stand and Deliver, what's the better couple, Dusha or Index. You do the whole Dexter and Duke partnership. But I mentioned this on the NXT review. It was strange to me that the first match that they did with Dexter and Duke was for the championship, because that felt like they went from point A all the way to Z, like immediately, from 1 week where they first formed the partnership, and then the next week they're getting a shot at the tag team titles. So that felt strange. That felt like what you lead up to and not be their first match. So I don't know if at that time they had already said, you know, we're just going to end this angle, so we just need to get to Z and give them the title shot so they can lose, and then we can let Dexter go. But Sat said it best. I feel like he would be fitting in with the 24/7. Like, imagine the segments where him and R-Truth are like a partner, and R-Truth like goes to his house and looks in his refrigerator and is like, "Why you got heads in your refrigerator and stuff like that?" Because he's a serial killer. R-Truth working with a serial killer, that would have been money. It would have been hilarious. It would have been rare laughs for the 24/7 division, in my opinion. So I think he would have fit in there as a comedy figure, but yeah, it just felt like he was in NXT for way too long. Persia Parada is someone that Dewdrop, even in the tweet where Sean announced their release, Dewdrop talked about how Persia was responsible for helping her get used to the United States and kind of helping her adapt to there. And the whole partnership with her in Indy, it's like this NXT tag team division has been cursed from the very beginning. We've heard the interview this week by Athena, aka Ember Moon,
Mm-hmm.
talking about her
Great
partnership
point.
with Shanti Blackheart. And then you have another tag team here with Indy and Persia. And now that tag team is no longer existence. That's the tag team more that I'm more confused with. Like, why would you let them go? And she was just in a segment this past week talking to Roxanne Perez. So it's
Yeah.
very confusing when these decisions were made and how they planned this out.
Yeah, it's really hard to try and justify any of this mentally. But again, if you are all just joining us, once again, the list of release stars by WWE today is Dakota Kai, Malcom Bivens, Blair Baldwin, a referee, Harland, Persia Parada, Sanjana George, also known as Vish Kanya, Draco Anthony, Raylene Devine, Mila Milani, and Dexter Lumis. So yeah, it's ridiculous, and it really kind of is that some of these you can't find use for half of these people. Really, like that to me is the biggest. That to me is the biggest takeaway from all of this. Right at the end of the day, it's we're hopefully now mostly removed from a pandemic. This to me doesn't hit as hard as it did like 2 years ago when all right, we're experiencing record profits and we're going to release you all to go and find work as we go through unprecedented times of plague and sickness. That to me was otherworldly levels of corporate douchebaggery. I hold less weight in releases like this because if you just don't see people, if you're not going to use them, I would rather you cut bait than keep them around and hoard talent. But I think you could also just use the talent. Because have you seen NXT 2.0? You could use as many talented wrestlers on this show as possible. And when people are trying to figure out, oh, what are they going to do with Dakota Kai? Is she going to beat Mandy Rose? Is she going to get another tag team? Or is she and Raquel going to be tag team champions? Or is she going to get called up? No, of course not. The real answer is that she's going to get fired. And I don't know if we really properly gave Dakota Kai enough time as part of the list here because Dakota Kai has been in NXT for so long, like so long, SP3. She has been kind of like the women's equivalent of the Johnny Gargano, Tommaso Ciampa, Undisputed Era type that has just stuck with NXT from generation to generation to generation and through NXT 2.0, dating back to NXT 1, all the way through the Triple H years and everything in between. There's been Dakota Kai. And it's felt like over the last year that really since she split up with Raquel Gonzalez, that would be the time that she would go to the main roster. But there's been matches on main event and never anything more than that. Maybe we should have taken those like a few main event matches and nothing to follow that as a sign that they maybe weren't going to look at her on the main roster as deeply as we thought. But at the same time, like, for the love of God, you know, when Toni Storm walks out the company and you're down a major women's star, it would be nice to just kind of replenish that spot immediately with someone you've got waiting around, like a Dakota Kai. But no, that's not the way that they do things. And I just personally find that frustrating.
She is honestly one of the best workers on any brand in WWE when she was there. She's one of the best characters. Just her, character change from being this very popular babyface Team Kick with, her friendship with Tegan Knox. That heel turn back at War Games is one of the best heel turns in NXT history. Her whole partnership with Raquel Gonzalez, she really helped so much Raquel Gonzalez's growth from where Raquel was when she debuted at TakeOver Portland to where she is now on SmackDown. Dakota Kai can take a little bit of credit for how Raquel has developed and become a superstar on the main roster. And it just is very confusing why they never went all the way with her, whether, she's been like the top heel at times for NXT over the past year and a half, but they've never pulled the trigger on her becoming the NXT Women's Champion. And very what you said about the tryouts and the main event matches is very akin to what we heard about with Bronson Reed, now
I was
Jonah.
just going to bring that up. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
going to bring Bronson Reed up as another example of that. It seems like if they bring you up and have a main event match or a dark match, and you don't end up on the main roster immediately afterwards, I don't think that's good news for you. I'll be honest.
Yeah, that's why, I've been seeing people in the chat say names, and like we said before, we don't want to say any names that aren't already out there. And I'm not suggesting this person, but there was another person who worked with Malcolm Bivens who also had these type of tryouts around the same time as Raquel, as Dakota Kai. I'm hoping that they realize that they have a cool story going on with Diamond Mine and they hold on to him. But the Dakota Kai situation is just like, come on, like the main roster needs one, more women, and two, more tag teams. You only have two tag teams with Sasha Banks and Naomi and Natalya and Shayna Baszler right now, because we don't know the relationship between Carmella and Zelina from week to week. But you could have just simply added a third team to give Raquel immediately something that she could have worked with on the main roster. You could have called up Raquel and Dakota. You reunited them on 1 week of NXT, and then the next week they lost the tag team titles after winning it at Stand and Deliver. You could have called both ladies up to the main roster and have a new team on the main roster. That would have been a cool way to have them debut, instead of these weird segments where Natalya's talking about Raquel right in front of her and she has to act like she didn't hear her. I'd rather have had them get called up together and give us a new tag team in the women's tag team division.
Don't get me started on that. It was one of the weirdest segments I've ever seen. So there have been some, I would say, developments, some clarifications, perhaps. Fightful Select, of course, has reported regarding the release of Harland, because that, to me, has been maybe the most surprising name to go in terms of, like, why did they release that guy? There are other surprising names as well, of course, but Harland has really thrown me off. I was really not expecting that one. But the reported reason for his release has been that he wasn't progressing enough in the ring for the company's liking. And of course, it also goes on to say that the official reason given to talent for other releases have been budget cuts. I don't know if that is, I don't know if that's better. I don't know if I'm the talent, if you just tell me, listen, we didn't have anything for them, I don't know that I would take that anything worse than hey, budget cuts as we make hundreds of millions of dollars. Yeah, that's just me. But regardless, we're set aside the corporate douchebaggery for a second. That to me is interesting though, because again, we don't know what goes on in the performance center, and we know that Parker Boudreaux had an injury last year. He was, he took a long time to get back in the ring. So we didn't see very much of Harland as far as being an in-ring guy. So I don't want to say fair play to them, because I could also say, well, train him better.
That's what I was going to say.
I want to balance this and try and stay, mostly objective about this. But I've never personally been a fan of WWE's training system. And I don't think it is like the optimal way to train pro wrestlers. So if I find someone like Harland, who 2 years ago had all the potential in the world, the next Brock Lesnar, and if you just can't train him properly, that's not to say he's not cut out for this. Maybe he's not, but maybe he just needs a better teacher. So there's nothing to say that he couldn't be something in pro wrestling. As he tweeted himself, Parker Boudreaux is back, with a picture of himself looking all buff and stuff. If he went and trained with Shibata for a year, I have no doubt he'd be great.
Yeah.
And not everyone's going to be Shibata, but there's a lot of places that I think he could probably go and have as good a chance of becoming something in wrestling as as WWE or better. So we'll see.
It just depends on what he wants to do now. I
Right.
think that he has a world of options for him, and probably more options than he had within WWE. But hearing that as the excuse, I'm just like, well, you kind of made an investment here. Why couldn't you just keep working with him? Why is it that he wasn't progressing the way you wanted him to? More time in the ring, more reps, take him off television. I understand that. Maybe take him off television if you don't feel that he's farther along, but just using him and giving him the reason of budget cuts. I understand they have a conference call and they want that figure to be higher than the last conference call and the quarterly numbers that they got. So I understand budget cuts at this point. We've been dealing with it for 2 years. If you don't understand it, then you're probably better off not even caring about any of this.
It's
But
a whole, yeah.
yeah, I understand at this point, this is what it's all about. It's all about that higher number on the quarterly call. But when you have someone like Harland, who you want to make these collegiate stars into the type of superstars for the future, then that's the type of guy that you give a little bit more time in the ring for, in my opinion.
I have more thoughts on this because I've gone down a train of thought, and I want to propose this to you in the chat and just put this train of thought out there. But for anybody who is just joining us, as I see that people have been flooding in, make sure that you give this video a like too. It helps. But the list currently of released WWE stars today is Dakota Kai, Malcom Bivens, Blair Baldwin, a referee, Harland, Persia Parada, Sanjana George, also known as Vish Kanya, Draco Anthony, Raylene Devine, Mila Milani, and Dexter Lumis. So, crazy list. Hopefully the final list. But again, if there are any more names before the end of this stream, we will let you know as soon as we find out. I want to propose something. And again, all of this is speculation. I feel the need to keep on saying that because I don't know what goes on down there. But you heard a lot about this guy being the next Brock Lesnar. Of course, Harland, Parker Boudreaux. You hear a lot about him being the next Brock Lesnar and such. You know what they didn't do with Brock Lesnar is make him a spooky man. You know? If you had just allowed Parker Boudreaux to be Parker Boudreaux, unbelievable collegiate grappler, shooter extraordinaire in, I don't know, a group like the Diamond Mine, perhaps. But if you had given him something that was a bit more him and not Spooky Man, maybe he would have prospered a little bit more. Because I don't know that they again, all speculation. But I don't know that they are looking at this guy and seeing like, oh, he's not progressing in the ring. He can't take arm drags. He can't, etc. That sort of thing. Or if it's like you look at him and we don't think he can play the Spooky Man. And if he can't play the Spooky Man, let's just get another guy who can play the Spooky Man. Because they're more focused now on characters and being WWE superstars than they were in OVW, where they wanted to get Randy Orton, John Cena, Batista, Brock Lesnar trained to be wrestlers. Yeah, John Cena was the prototype and Batista was Leviathan, but they didn't send these guys up there to play the character of, well, this one's going to be, witch doctor, what Zaz, serial killer, whatever Harland is, because those are the things where once you are a more complete, well-rounded performer, you can put the coat of paint on your character and take your already developed skills and base them around your character because you already know how to work. If it's the same thing that happened with Mark Merrow in WCW, where they trained him how to be Johnny B. Bad, just as an example. If you get trained how to be a character and you're not fit to be that character, in maybe Harland's case, that doesn't lead you it doesn't give you much potential to have a successful career, because then you have to relearn everything from scratch. And again, this is all me speculating. This is a hypothesis. But I think there's a big difference between what is happening in developmental now compared to what is happening when we had guys like Brock Lesnar coming through WWE developmental. It was a totally different system then, and I don't think it's necessarily better now.
And
In
it
fact,
was
I know it's not. I know it's not. I know OVW was much more successful than NXT was in terms of like developing talent.
it produced a lot more stars because they had the people there
Yeah.
to work with them, Danny Davis, as well as Jim Cornette. And you
Dangle.
came up within a few minutes with a better idea than NXT did, because putting him in Diamond Mine, having the Stokely Hathaway, Malcolm Bivens talk for him, as well as him working directly with Roderick Strong, someone with 20 years of experience inside the square circle, he would have got the little things. And like you said, when they presented it, Mookie Man, he had to do more of the power moves. He had to work like a Kane or a Big Show when he is the next Brock Lesnar. I understand, shaving his head to give him a different look. That's totally fine. But to have a guy that can, do wrestling, that can do real wrestling moves, do the suplexes, do the grappling, and you just make him do power moves, then you're trying to put a round peg into a square hole, and it doesn't work. It didn't work for him, and that's probably why his progress wasn't what they wanted it to be, because they wanted him to be something that he really wasn't to begin with.
Yeah, it's really frustrating because it very much seems these days like, oh, we don't have interest in a Keith Lee or a Karrion Kross or whatever. We don't have interest in a Pete Dunne. We want a Butch. Let's have Pete Dunne play Butch. Instead, I would rather just see Pete Dunne. And I don't know this for sure, but I can suspect that I would rather have seen Parker Boudreaux than Harland. I don't know that.
I second
cannot
this.
confirm that, but that is my hypothesis.
I second
Thankfully,
that.
again, yes. I don't want to speak for people. I know people like their goofy wrestling, and that's also fine. That's also totally fine. But it does seem like we've come to the end of releases. I think Dexter Lumis was the last one. We have not heard anything from Sean Ross Sapp or PW Insider or anything in a little while now, but I've kind of been looking over some of the reaction. Of course, Io Shirai posted a tweet of a broken heart. Boy, has she seen NXT go through some times. Goodness me.
Over the last year alone.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Over the last year, over the last 2 years. Goodness me. I can't even begin to think going into like Takeover Portland and then what everything would turn into immediately afterwards. Nonsense. But as we hopefully wrap up this stream, I don't think there's too much more to say because I don't really have anything to say about Raylene Divine. Like, with respect, if you're a Performance Center star and haven't been on TV just yet, I don't have too much to say. I hope that they are both, all the Performance Center talent is able to find work. But I will say we didn't really talk much about Draco Anthony, who hasn't been on TV too much, but has been another of the Dante Chen, Malik Blade, Idris Enofe level of guys in NXT 2.0, where they'll get brought in with like one video package. They might do a video package before their debut, and then they come out and they probably lose that match. But it's kind of like I was in the Marines, or I'm fighting for my family, or something fairly one-dimensional, but it's a little bit more than nothing, right? Yeah. But they don't, obviously, he's not being brought out there with like the full, you didn't have a word cloud where you fill out all of his characteristics. No, they just put Marine or fighting for his family, and that's it. That's the end of the brainstorming situation. But Draco Anthony had like a really short little run there with Joe Gacy, and then blew it off with a really weird match with Zion Quinn. And that's showbiz for him. That's it. That's the end of the show for Draco Anthony. I don't know. I mean, again, we can go over what the rationale was behind these ones, but at the end of the day, we asked the same questions about what the rationale was behind Hit Row or what it was behind Keith Lee. At the end of the day, it very much likely is, in the case of these guys, just budget cuts. If they can save some money, they will do it. And I don't necessarily agree that's how I would run the company, but I don't think we should necessarily be looking for like deeper reasoning behind some of the releases. I bet they just didn't see anything in Jericho Anthony out of his 3 matches, and that was enough for them to cut bait. I probably would have given these people a little bit more to work with in that time. Like, give them 20 minutes against Roderick Strong, and like give a real tryout. Like, put them in the main event and just like have a showcase like this, and again, it's not the same situation, but you just give them a chance to actually go out there and do something.
Yeah.
Not everybody can hit a home run off a T-ball, If it's just, this is what you're going to do today, you're going to go out there and have a 5-minute match with Zion Quinn, you're going to lose. Of course he's not going to show you anything.
And I think he had like a squat. He was one of the guys that Harland like squashed, wasn't he, as well? And his whole
probably.
run was kind of confusing because the original vignette where they had him, he was like presented as a former gang member that went into the Marines, and he was transforming his life. And then when he debuted, they only focused on the Marine part. They only focus on he has like, oh, he's a former, a part of the military, Marines, all that, but they didn't focus on the complete character. You could have filled out a word bubble just with that little first vignette that they did, but they totally focused on one part of the vignette and not the entire character, and it became one-dimensional. And then he got into the feud with Joe Gacy and Harland, and they basically just dropped that after that one match, and then he focused on the guy that was telling him not to focus on Joe Gacy, and then that was his final match with the company. It was very confusing, the entire run for Draco Anthony, but he's another one that I feel like they didn't give him a chance to really develop. This is what developmental is for. If you saw something in these guys to put them on TV, to even give them a vignette, I don't understand why you don't give them time to actually develop, to get those reps inside the ring, to work at the performance center, to get on television. If NXT 2.0 is this new developmental that you're focusing on superstars, I don't understand why you don't give them a chance to fully get there. But to each his own. It's their company. They made the choice to cut bait. They, with the kind of the women that, are on this list that are from the performance center, this would be the kind of the time to bring them in, because you're doing this whole breakout tournament for the women. But they just brought in a whole slate of new women with Notorious Mimi, who's now Sloane Jacobs, as well as, Roxy, who's now Roxanne Perez. And maybe they saw more in them than they see in these ladies that weren't given the opportunity to be on NXT just yet. So those are kind of understandable, but the people that you did get on TV, what did you see in them in the first place to give them that opportunity? Maybe you should give them a little bit more time, but we are where we are, but we're in a much better position overall in the wrestling world. All the independents are back open. Major companies like Impact Wrestling, they lost a few women this week with the inspiration, taking time away from the in-ring to start on their acting. They can fill some slots over there. You got GCW is the hottest independent promotion out there. You got indies like Warrior Wrestling, AAW, that need people like that to get an opportunity. Tony Khan is trying to get a TV deal for Ring of Honor. Maybe he needs more of these women that can be in developmental, or even the guys like Draco Anthony, that they'll give them a chance to get out there. Me, myself, I've seen it in the live chat. I've seen it on Twitter. If he's not on the phone with Stokely Hathaway, I could come up with 8 different ideas for Stokely Hathaway in AEW. Smart Mark Sterling's got a lot new clients. He's still a lawyer for MJF. He's working with Tony Nese. He can lose out on Jade Cargill and put Stokely Hathaway with Jade Cargill. That is just money written all over it. If you wanted to be a babyface, Stokely Hathaway with Swerve Strickland and Keith Lee, neither one of them need a mouthpiece, but them together, oh my God, that would just skyrocket them, and they'd be my favorite tag team. They'd be my choice to be the next AEW tag team champions. Dakota Kai in AEW or Impact Wrestling. I just spoke to Deonna Purrazzo. I would love to see that match in Impact Wrestling. They just got Taya Valkyrie back over there. Love to see that match. Rosemary, Tasha Steelz, their division is so underrated, and getting someone like Dakota Kai would put more eyes on them. And someone like Persia Parada, they just lost out on two women from Australia. Add one in. No one girl that can get in there and have a good matchup with just about anybody and can still develop within that Impact Wrestling, women's division. That would be great for them as well. And there's other promotions like NWA, MLW. I want to see these people actually have a chance to get out there and become stars now that they just lost out on a chance with WWE. So I'm wishing all of them the best of luck.
Yes, and as we all should. At the end of the day, I don't want anybody to lose their jobs. It's lousy, and I wish the best for all of them. And thankfully now, like you said, wrestling is in a much better place than it was 2 years ago. So hopefully everybody can land on their feet and do okay. We do have some additional details about said releases, though, from Fightful Select, a wonderful service that everyone should be subscribed to. It is the absolute best source of wrestling news these days. I think pretty much undisputed at this point. But we had, of course, learned that these cuts were made by John Laurinaitis, who is the most popular man in wrestling over the last day or two, I have learned. Says that Malcom Bivens, a.k.a. Stokely Hathaway, our favorite, made it very clear that he was not planning to re-sign with the company. So again, I think his release should be taken with a bit of a grain of salt in regards to the others. Just different circumstances, of course, as this is all on a case-by-case basis. Dakota Kai apparently knew the release was coming, or at least suspected it. Harland signed and was told he wasn't progressing as much in the ring, and said that several of the release stars are in good spirits. So, sounds like not everyone's taking this too hard. That's good to know.
That's good to know. At least with some of these people, they expected it. With Stokely Hathaway, Malcom Bivens, he refused to re-sign back in February. So maybe a lot of these people saw the writing on the wall. You can probably suspect Dakota Kai is maybe more akin to like an Athena, where they're having these meetings about dressing sexier, and that's not really Dakota Kai's thing. And you can see she was already seeing the writings on the wall that this wasn't the place for her. So I'm glad that it's not something that is too much of a shock to a lot of these people on this list. And like I said, there is plenty of wrestling out there. This world is wide open. There's plenty of promotion that I didn't just name that will love to have anybody on this list, regardless of people that we've seen on NXT and haven't seen yet. They're going to have a chance to get out there and have success in the wrestling world.
I think you've said it very well, and I think we will wrap this up shortly, but just in case anybody has joined us since the last time we read them out, the unfortunate list of released names from today's batch have been Dakota Kai, Malcom Bivens, Blair Baldwin, Harland, Persia Parada, Sanjana George, Draco Anthony, Raylene Devine, Mila Milani, and Dexter Lumis. These, of course, many have it's a ranging list of talent, had been on NXT from anywhere from no time at all to seemingly forever in Dakota Kai's case, and everywhere in between for everyone else. And as you just said, that we're very much hoping that everybody can land on their feet, everybody prosper in pro wrestling. Thankfully, WWE is not the only game in town these days, and not everybody, but a lot of people, a lot more people than before have been able to make a full-time living in independent pro wrestling. And that is one of the better things about the business since returning from the pandemic, in my opinion. So I'm really crossing my fingers that everybody does well. In the meantime, God, if I needed any reason to want to watch NXT less, now I don't even get Malcom Bivens on this show. Like, holy God, I've never seen such self-sabotage. To take NXT from what it was SP3, and I don't want to get off on the whole thing here, because this is not going to be just an anti-NXT thing, but these are NXT releases. God damn. What is NXT going to be next week?
I have no idea, ladies and gentlemen, but me and Sat will be here on Wednesday, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. UK, to talk about what the new version of NXT after these releases is going to look. I have no idea, but they just took away one of my favorite storylines. Like just Malcom Bivens looking at Roderick Strong this past week as Roderick was talking down the Creeds and Ivy Now was one of my favorite parts of the show. So now that storyline, it seems like that's kaput for now. and we're gonna have to see what's next for this whole entire NXT and what's next with WWE, because around this time it's not just NXT that's affected, it's sometimes the main roster. But of course, we will be here to talk all about it.
Yeah, hopefully this is the end of the releases, but of course, if that does change, make sure, of course, that you are subscribed to both WrestleTalk and WrestleTalk Podcast for any and all coverage that we will have about any such releases. Hope they don't happen, but in the case that they do, find your wrestling coverage here. And with that, we will probably wrap things up. We hopefully have no more releases to talk about. Thank you, of course, SP3, for being able to set aside some time and have a chat with me about a less than desirable subject on such short notice. You are an absolute champion. I thank you dearly, sir.
Thank you for having me, Tempest. You're one of my favorite people to talk about wrestling with. Unfortunately, sometimes it's subjects that we don't want to talk about because we don't want to see anyone lose their jobs. But hopefully, by watching this, everyone knows that there is a positive spin to this. A lot of these people are not taking it that hard. And like we've said, and we've repeated, and we will continue to repeat it, the wrestling world is wide open, and there's a world of opportunities for all these people that we're talking about.
Absolutely. So, of course, make sure that you check out the WrestleTalk podcast coming tomorrow as Pete and I review SmackDown and Rampage. Until then, everybody stay beautiful. Make sure you do all the WrestleTalk things, like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff, and just stop firing wrestlers. That'd be great. Everybody have a good weekend.